I'm going to keep moving away from the light. It's very bright for those that don't know. My name is Martin Levy. This is actually the second PLNOG that I've attended. I'm just blown away by just how much material and how many people are here. So this is very good from my point of view. I'm really going to talk about what's going on this year in the V6 world. Some very important things that have taken a long time to happen. The talk, the name launch, is literally about World IPv6 launch, which will happen in June this year, and I'll talk about that when I give some background. But first, let me just run through just really a very quick introduction to what's gone on in the V6 world. A lot of it from our company's point of view, Hurricane Electric, but also globally, what else has happened. And the reality is, it's taken us a long time to get to where we are today. But now that we've got a good understanding of what's happening in the V6 world, it's sort of very important to look at 2012 and understand how to move forward. So if you look at a timeline, you look at a timeline from our company's point of view. In reality, there's 5 or 6 years that just sat in the standards arena when the IETF started in 95, but called for this in 94 to come up with a next generation IP protocol. The realization then was that a few things can be fixed in IPv4, and most importantly, the address space issue, the running out of address space, could be dealt with. But it took an awful long time. And in reality, when you realize the world runs much faster than certain standards organizations seem to respond to. The talk two talks ago from here from Extreme Hardware Company talked about 40 gig and 100 gig and pricing. I mean, it's the same issue, but that's an IEEE issue versus an IETF issue. But from our point of view, 2001 is truly the first year that anybody got their hands on anything somewhat useful that could route IPv6. That's 11 years ago. It wasn't very good. But that experience, and quite frankly, painful experience for quite a bit of it, is a plus and a minus. The plus is that those people that persevered really got to understand why V6 was important. Alas, a few other people looked at it and said, this is painful, and walked away. But for our network, and you look at all these dates, the fact that we started our tunnel broker service way back at the beginning of time, but back in 2006 is where we made a very conscious effort to do a technology refresh and make sure that whatever we were buying was V6 capable. Still not an easy thing to do in 2006. This is trivial today. This is trivial for nearly every element in a network, but it was not trivial back in 2006. But you continue through these years of actually having real operational experience, and you know, we did a lot of work on 6-to-4 and Teredo and other protocols out there, things that quite frankly need to go away, but they're there today. But when you go look at last year, at 2011, something very important happened, and I'm going to delve into this, talk about it. We ran through a one-day 24-hour test of V6 done by major content providers. We got a lot of people interested in World V6 Day, and for 24 hours, in fact, a lot of players spent a lot of time trying to understand whether they went by deploying V6, whether it worked. I'll tell you about that in a moment. But in reality, 2011 had a much more important event. We ran out of V4 space at the top of the tree. We ran out at IANA. Pretty soon after that, APNIC in Asia Pacific ran out of IP space. And that meant that, for example, in the V4 world, if you're a major telecom provider in Asia Pacific, you cannot go back and get more IP space. This isn't hypothetical at this point. This is real. Quite frankly, the numbers point to RIPE being the next player to run out. That means that a hosting provider, a telco, a broadband provider, a mobile provider somewhere in the greater European area sometime potentially in 2012, and I can reference you to the various graphs, we'll get to the point when you cannot go back to RIPE and get more IPv4 space. But 2011, as good as it was from the World v6 Day event, now we're sitting there with World v6 launch set for June of this year, and that's the one really to look at. That's the one that's much more interesting. So let's just again go look at some of the metrics. Let's make sure that we're actually talking about something that makes sense. I've presented these metrics, and I will continue to present these metrics because they're positive, because there's still numbers going up. Whether you look at the number of networks, you look at the number of DNS top-level domains that can support glue records, a subtlety of v6 support. Whether you look at the number of countries, we keep doing this study with just about 150 countries around the world that have some form of real v6 networking, and that number keeps going up. And we've got training. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end, because it's still for us been one of the biggest wins to get people interested and realize one fundamental important thing. These days v6 isn't that complicated. That's a good thing. So let's look at a couple of the numbers, and guess what? A few things will show up on the graph. This was a graph. This is a graph that comes off a v6 progress report that's been around forever. And we measure on this the number of networks, the number of BGP networks out there that have v6 enabled. The graph keeps going up. But there's some psychology going on here, which is really interesting. When IANA run out actually occurred, when the press actually started to put this in the popular press, we saw a jump. But we also saw a jump because pretty soon after that we announced World v6 Day. But look what happened after World v6 Day. Just like everything else, when you take the pressure off, when you stop talking about something, things slow down. The graph just slows down. And we're hoping that World v6 launch will take this graph and bring it back up again and keep the numbers going up. This is a graph of the whole of the internet. You can actually do it on a per region or a per country basis via the RIPE website. There's a couple of good places to get this data. Here's another couple of graphs. Again, they're all positive. This is just the amount of networks that are announced globally, not allocated, but actually announced, live networks that are routable around the world. This again has shown a jump. It shows a little bit of a slowdown after World v6 Day. This seems to make sense, unfortunately. But the bottom line is these graphs keep going up. And if your network has been is running v6 and you're adding to those stats, then that's a good thing. That's a pretty long view. That's a 500-day view. So we're seeing, some good growth there. But this is the key point. What happened last year? Why did we end up doing this one-day test, and what did it actually prove? Well, the test was done for a very specific reason, but the general public completely ignored that reason. And actually, that was a good thing. So you have a simple technical test. By enabling v6, for everybody that has v6, that has a laptop or an iPad or a smartphone that has v6 capable, and they're on a v6 network, they could potentially access some of this content via v6. If you just live in a v4 world with no v6, it should have no effect. You should not be able to notice a thing. But there was this 1% special case, maybe less than 1%, no one quite knew the number, that said that you may be on a v6 network you didn't know about because you've never tried to use it, and it's broken. And if it's broken, when v6 is enabled, it will cause a problem for you, and you won't have an easy time debugging it. Those networks exist. They're not impossible to find. But the question is, what effect will it have if you take major websites, websites that are used every day, such as Google, Facebook, parts of Yahoo, parts of Microsoft Bing, etc., and enable v6. And what if it breaks? What if people can't get to Facebook? Heaven forbid. What if people can't get to Google or another search engine? What if other sites that also decide to participate don't have access? And what will happen to those users? Well, an awful lot of planning went into this, and there have been some very solid presentations on all the minutiae. I just want to talk about a couple of easy stuff, because from our point of view, we're an IP backbone. So from our point of view, we have a much easier stat to play around with. So these are the traffic stats for what happened that day. And there's some brilliant takeaway from this. One is, World IPv6 Day started at 0 UTC, so midnight in the UK. It lasted exactly 24 hours, but the moment it started, we saw essentially a 3x jump in bandwidth, like that. And pretty soon after that, by the time the 24 hours cycled through, we had sat at about a 5x jump in traffic. Now, as a backbone, that's a good stat. But we are neither hosting nor providing broadband. We are purely the conduit in the middle. So we know we have customers who are receiving bits, and we know we have customers sending bits. But this graph wouldn't exist like this if there wasn't a successful path between the two players. We weren't doing the work that a Facebook or a Google was doing to track down the users that were having problems and to explain to them, you should fix something on your network. In reality, it turned out that it was very hard to find any documentation of somebody having a problem that day. It was actually quite a boring day. And that's great. That was fantastic. That really, in a way, wasn't expected. But that's what happened. And the day continued, and as you can tell, at the end of the day, the traffic goes down, but not back down to where it was. And the reason is because during that 24 hours, a couple of companies had sort of sat there and said, this is working. The phones aren't ringing. People are not complaining. We can leave parts of our service on so that we have more traffic, more ability to take one step further to a full v6 world. So that's a short view over a couple of days. I'll tell you, for our company, it was just like any other day. There was nothing special about this because we're in the middle. We're in the wholesale transit business. We're not sitting there with the type of end users. But let's look at it on a longer term and see what happens. And this is a longer term graph over many, many months. This is nearly a full 1 year graph. And you can see that we definitely see a long term effect after World v6 Day. The fact that some traffic stayed on and has slowly, very slowly, increased over time is a good thing. If there had been a problem in enabling v6, something that people were very concerned about for quite some time, that graph would have gone down. People would have said, I'm losing money. Oh, that's a key point. This is content from players that are in the game of making money. They want to make sure your video works so that you click on an ad. You want to do a search and maybe click on an ad. All of the things that are associated with content and revenue says things must be working pretty well. Now, as a comparison, I've left another graph on here. Here's the purple line. This is just DNS traffic. This is v6 DNS traffic. It doesn't get affected by World v6 Day. It isn't meant to. The World v6 Day test was purely about web traffic. Port 80 or port 443, nothing else. It wasn't about DNS. It wasn't about all of the other protocols that exist on the web, whether it be email or the like. It was purely about web. So this is purely looking at web traffic, in our case on our backbone. We expect the jump to go up again, but we'll talk about that in a second. What's interesting about this also is that it gave, probably more important than the technical side, it gave people a lot of faith that that v6 was ready for prime time. And that really had no proof out there prior to this day. For the people who believed in v6, myself included, and maybe other people here, we knew it worked. but we had absolutely no proof. We had no way of going out and saying, look, on a mass test around the globe, it works. This was that test. And for 24 hours, you know, we proved it really worked, and then keeping it on has been a good thing. So let's talk about the future. Let's talk about what's going to go on this year. So with lots of discussion prior to this, the question is, what do you do next? And people said, oh, we should do a week of testing or whatever. No. The end result is launch. Turn it on, leave it on. We proved a year ago that we didn't have problems. We also went through a lot of quite a lot of, I mean, last year wasn't as easy as I'm making out. There was an awful lot of hardware debugging that went on, but that was the good part. We managed to get a lot of people ready for last June. Now we get ready for this June. The 6th of June, 6 of 6, is actually a rather interesting date. Yes, it's IPv6, it's the number 6. It has other significances, turning off of the 6 bone way back when. So this is sort of an easy date to remember, but it isn't a 24-hour test. It isn't a 1-week test. This is turn it on, leave it on. So that means that for major content plays, Google, Facebook, Yahoo, and many, many more. I'm just giving you just a high level, but World v6 Day had hundreds upon hundreds of properties that joined into this. Those properties will turn on v6 at that date, and they will leave it on. So now the question is, what can you do to participate? It really is split into 3 areas. It's predominantly a focus on access networks, because last year was a focus on content. But not to leave anything behind, hosting and content is still there and represented. Hardware vendors who have either in the data center side of things like load balancers and firewalls, a big focus of last year, will continue, but also hardware at the CPE level, at the level of the broadband user, and basically anything else. And anything else is sort of interesting because it turns out last year was a very interesting day. Although it was a 24-hour process and it was really done for very specific testing, it turned out a lot of people said, ooh, we better be ready for that day. So we saw an awful lot of people who were getting ready for World v6 Day, and we expect to get ready for World v6 launch, which are in a completely different space. So we see everything from DNS suppliers through, you name it, through enterprises that look at this date and say, I need to get motivated and get ready for v6. They're sometimes thinking of it as a Y2K event, and to be honest, I'm not going to disagree with that. Anything that gets people motivated to do this. So what needs to be done? Let's look at some stats and the like out of, let's look at some statements and look at some stats. Both Google and Facebook have been fairly public about what they've said. Google has absolutely said, whereas they were very conservative a year ago, this year they've absolutely said it will be turned on and people will be using it every day. Facebook has said essentially the same thing, and that means that they're looking at deploying this throughout all their data centers. You can see the same statement from Yahoo. You can see the same statement from some of the hardware vendors like Cisco and Juniper and the like. This is a good thing, and there's plenty more of this. On the web. This is off the Google blog. This is off the Facebook blog. I'm sorry, the URLs are totally the wrong color to read. All right, so look at some stats. I'm going to focus first off on what to do if you're an IP backbone. To be absolutely honest, we're an IP backbone. Our customers are IP backbones and the like. So why not focus on that? And I'm being very, very trivial when I talk about this, but basically it's a case of enabling v6 on the core and on your peering, your interconnects. That trivial statement is it could be the subject of days of tutorials. But at this point in time, if you're running 10-year-old or 12-year-old hardware in your network, well, you have other problems besides v6. But if you've done an upgrade, if you've done some technology refresh in the last 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, even in the last year, you're ready for V6. It's very hard to find something that hasn't been shipped at the core networking side that isn't V6 capable. Again, sorry about the URL being not there. That's bgp.he.net. That's our BGP website /country/PL for Poland. And I just looked at this afternoon. There's about 1,300 1381 active networks out of Poland. It's an amazingly high stat. I mean, it's very impressive. But only 132, less than 10%, have some form of V6 on their network. And that 10% is less than the world average, which earlier was about 12 point something. I think it's about 12.8 at the moment. So from that point of view, there needs to be a little bit of a focus and find out where and what's happening with all these networks there. But the reality is that the step process, which again can be found in many, many different presentations, and I'm just giving an overview here. I'm not trying to hit the hard questions, but simply to tell you that they're out there on many a tutorial or many a presentation. But your local, your local RIR, RIPE, or your LIR is absolutely set up these days to provide IPv6 space to your backbone. The fact that enabling it on a backbone, assuming you've got fairly new hardware, if you're a member on the doing peering here at PLIX, in Warsaw on PLIX, then again you're on an internet exchange that's totally ready for V6. And then same thing goes for your upstreams, your transit providers. Now, I can make the humorous joke, but I don't make it humorously, I make it for real. If you end up with an upstream provider that can't do V6, well, get a new one. In 2012, that should not be an issue that you should have to worry about. And although I'm trivializing this onto one slide, the reality is this is probably one of the best tried and tested paths for V6. You won't be out alone. You probably could find another network of similar configuration somewhere else in the world that's already done a V6 transition and enabled V6. This we've found over and over again as we've talked to networks around the world. It turns out no one is that unique anymore. The number of hardware vendors and the like is actually quite finite. The amount of software revs that exist, although they may be quite high, due to other security bugs, people are fairly up to date. All right, so what if you're doing hosting? What if you're doing content? Well, guess what? Most of the process is identical to doing an IP backbone, but you do start getting, things change when you start looking at the actual hosted platform. But this is 2012. Every one of those software platforms out there has got V6 capability. In fact, actually, it's pretty hard to find one that doesn't. And again, by the way, it's pretty hard to miss. I'm saying that negative. It's pretty easy to find a tutorial out there on what to do to enable V6 on those platforms. As a hosting company, you have more work to do. You have to integrate it with your DNS for your customer base. You have to look at the various software services that you have. All of these things, again, in 2012 are fairly easy to do, and other people have done. If we were having this discussion in 2006 or 2007, well, you'd question what I'm saying, because it was pretty hard. Few people had done it, and a lot of people had sweated out the hard stuff. But this day and age, it's very easy to do. So that's the good news. So now let's talk about broadband access, mobile, and the like. And quite frankly, don't listen to me. Jan is talking in well, actually 30 minutes, 20 minutes, and he is far more an expert on the access side of it. But guess what? You can see examples of V6 enabled at the mobile, at the broadband environment. It's a much more complicated task because it involves end users and potentially, not potentially, sometimes, nearly always, customer premise equipment or smartphones or whatever. That makes life a little bit more complicated, but it's out there. All right, I'm going to talk about one last thing, because one of the things that we have done we've done at Hurricane Electric is we've done this certification process. And one of the things that we came across over the years was this realization that people looked at V6 and said, "Oh, that's hard." And the reason they said that was because they hadn't done it, hadn't tried it. So we basically we built an online system that was very practical, and more importantly, we put a goal at the end of it. We'll ship you a T-shirt. So if you actually look over the years, you know, in the last year we've gone from 2,500 to 4,500 people who have hit the top level out of 100,000 people that have started in this process. They're predominantly spread around the world, although I've got the stats quite a lot in Europe. The practical side of this is that, look, if I want to teach you, let's sit down for half a day in a tutorial, and you'll be bored to death, and your eyes will close, and you won't learn anything. That's the reality of life. Why not do it somewhat differently? Why not put something that's online and say, hey, okay, here's a few questions, but in reality, let me try something different. Let me send you an email. Oh, but I need you to receive that email via your email server being V6 enabled. Or I need to look at a web page on your website, but it has to be V6 enabled. And if it is, then you get your points appropriately for that. So the whole process, which goes through many, many steps, was about getting people online and actually getting them to this point when, for a World V6 day or a World V6 launch, they can say, yeah, we've done that. So by the time you finished, and these, I just dumped these numbers right now, so we're above 4,500, 4,600. Europe still leads, which is pretty cool, actually. Europe still leads as the most number of people that have gone through this process. There's a couple of politicians in Brussels at the European Commission who love that stat and completely, state it all the time. But we've got everywhere, somewhere in this country, there are 86 people in Poland that have gone through this and got all the way to the end of the testing. I don't know if there's anybody in here that's done it. 1, 2, 3. Oh, wow. Cool. Anyway, the whole purpose was not just a boring set of questions and answers. The purpose was to get things online, to do it very, very practically. The last thing that we've done, which has been to sort of grow this up a little bit and start taking it out. We started doing translation on this. We started with Chinese. We've done it on a support by support basis. In other words, as we've had groups from around the world that want to translate all the testing into another language. So if actually this date, yeah, so we've done Portuguese was the last one we did. There's about 6 more languages which we will do and hopefully release in the next couple of months. But the whole goal has been to get more people around the world interested and understanding how easy this is to do. All right, couple more minutes. As they say, I have the mic, so I get to put one last slide up about us. Global network, for us, always V6 enabled. In fact, actually, there's a key phrase around the company besides everybody knowing V6. V6 is boring. Everything that we do is V4 and V6 by default. Customers don't have to ask for V6. They always get V6. V6 is part of day-to-day in the same way that V4 is part of day-to-day. So every internet peering point, every link, every customer connection, every hosting, every data center port are all enabled for V4 and V6 by default. And therefore, sort of we're done, from that department. We turned up Warsaw, as I'm here, I might as well say that. Turned up Warsaw in December. So that's about as far east as we've gone so far. But just the network that keeps on growing. I'm in time, and I've got time for questions. Thank you.
Are there any questions? If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
No questions, because everybody's ready for this year, right?
So thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.